I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Good day, everybody. I'm your host, Seth. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Hornady Podcast, coming at you live here from the Dallas Safari Club Convention. I've got a chance to sit down with a gentleman here. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but Corey, thanks for coming on the show with me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Corey, what's your position here with the Dallas Safari Club?
So I am CEO of Dallas Safari Club and the DSC Foundation.
All right. So, sounds like you're the right guy to talk to explain to our listeners what the Dallas Safari Club is really about. What's the mission of the Safari Club here?
Yeah, so we are an international conservation organization based out of Dallas, Texas. We have a global footprint from a conservation standpoint, and our mission is very simple. It's based on conservation, education, and advocacy. Now, you can break each of those down and probably spend 20 minutes on each of those about what we do in each of those three buckets, but we work everywhere from right down the road in West Texas to restoring desert bighorn sheep to pronghorn to working around the world with markhor in the mountains of Asia.
Wow. So incredibly diverse. And some of that history, did it start as mainly excuse me for being ignorant maybe, but the name implies when I think safari, I think Africa or something like that. Has there been a push to bring it back into the States here, or was it always kind of like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, again, about 40 years ago, Dallas Safari Club got its start here, based in Dallas, Texas. So that's really, obviously, the DSC name of it. Our corporate headquarters is here. And it was formed with a global basis, and really safari meaning adventure, not specific to Africa, which happens a lot, you know.
Yeah.
And we can kind of get mischaracterized, but rightfully so.
Awesome. Okay, so with that in mind, what do you guys need? Yeah, what do you guys need? You know, for our audience listening, we're here in the United States. Are we doing different chapters? Are we trying to spread stuff out here in the 48? We're trying to get more volunteers. What's going on locally that might entice somebody out there to reach out and become a member of the Dallas Safari Club?
Sure. So we have a very growing membership. We've been increasing about 25 to 30% a year, which is a very dynamic growth. And much of that is attributed to our chapter network system. So we have a little more than a dozen chapters across the United States. From the Far East would be our Northeast chapter based out of Connecticut. West, we would go to Wyoming. We have a chapter. And then, of course, across the central United States, actually looking to start one in California very soon, all the way down to Louisiana, Florida, with a number in Texas as well. And so we have a footprint all across North America. With our membership is roughly 15% international, and the rest are within the United States.
Wow, so you got to have members in every state.
We do.
Okay, so if you're curious about wanting to conserve and to preserve the right to hunt for you and your children and your children's children, it's always a good idea to get a part of these organizations, and there's going to be somebody in the state you live in that can help you get started or find out more about it. That's pretty awesome. And is this new role for you? Is that I understand that correct?
I've been in this role 4 years now.
Okay.
Prior to that, I worked for 16 years, a little more than that, as a biologist, and then ultimately a director for Texas Parks and Wildlife. So I'm a certified wildlife biologist as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Qualified for the job. The right guy for the job. That's awesome. So is there anything you want to tell our listeners that they might not get otherwise? You know, you hear about the Dallas Safari Club. Obviously, we're here at the convention. It's just amazing. But for a guy like myself, I live out in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska. There's white-tailed deer. There's some mule deer. There's a little bit of antelope, a little bit of elk. But other than that, not a whole lot going on. So there's a lot of people like me out there. Anything you want to tell them about Dallas Safari Club?
Yeah, I think of maybe an understanding of the relevance of what the mission of DSC is and how it touches the hunter that you're just talking about. You know, someone that's interested. In our conservation projects, when I say that, where we are advocating in state legislatures all the way to Capitol Hill. We have a full-time lobbyist in Washington, D.C. as well, and we're in the process of building out a full government affairs department based in Washington, D.C. From the advocacy side, working on supporting the game and fish agencies to ensure that they are supported. We've seen some ill-advised pieces of legislation, a couple of eastern states, a couple of western states these last 2 years. in which we saw wildlife commissions essentially having their ability to manage wildlife within their state taken away from them by legislatures, which is obviously not the tenets in which North American model of wildlife conservation has been so successful with.
Right.
Yeah.
So it impacts everybody. It impacts the whole country. And getting into the international side of things, over there, I guess I've never been international hunting, but I hope to one day. And I think there's a ton of us out there that is in my stuff to do list. But you're doing stuff internationally as well.
We are. So we work with a couple of countries in Asia, Tajikistan, Pakistan, some of those countries associated with mountain species, ibex, markhor.
Okay.
And it's ensuring that quotas are science-based, that there's community benefits from hunting such as that.
Okay.
And then it's sustainable. And then obviously we promote it. And we work extensively on the African continent as well. Much of it is because that's where many of the critical threats to international hunting are coming from. And surprisingly, maybe to many, is those threats are not coming from local. Those threats are coming from the United States and from Europe, in which you have the Western world wants to impose its own sense of ideologies and principles, if you will. I would use that word in air quotes.
Yep.
On someone in Southern and Western Africa, in which they have no idea, no concept of what it's like to have to pull your livestock in your house at night to keep a leopard or a lion from eating it. You know, we, as a Westerner, where we go and we turn the water on and we flip on the air conditioner, we certainly can't understand what living like that is like.
No, and I think it's important. You know, it's interesting for me to learn about this, about the impact that hunting has in those areas on the community and on the local population. And we were at an awards ceremony last night, and I learned about something I knew nothing about at the time, and that was, I think it was called the COVID something. I want to talk about that because to me that really was like, wow, I didn't quite understand or appreciate how COVID locally here in the U.S. or all over the world rather would affect through an indirect measure the hunting, which carried over to all of the benefits that the hunters bring to those communities in places like Africa. Let's talk about what the name of that group was, or that was going on there.
Yeah, so that was a program we initiated about a year and a half ago. The acronym was Hunters Care, and CARE stood for COVID Anti-Poaching Relief Effort.
Okay.
And as we saw, you may or may not know, but about 80% of Southern Africa hunters come from the United States. And so the importance of the North American hunting client to be able to travel to Africa was obviously imperative for the ability for that hunting operator to ensure revenue coming in for them to pay their anti-poaching staff and local communities, provide meat drops and all those kind of things that are local requirements. And so that ceased during COVID whenever flights wouldn't take place and or people were, I'll say, afraid to make the trip. And so in place of that, DSC stood up and said, hey, you know what? Anti-poaching has to continue. And it has to continue for all species. If that's literally the harvesting of wood and forest, to game species, the non-game species. One of the coolest videos we have, to digress a second, is one of our anti-poaching teams that we funded through Hunters Care were working on a road and catching these motorcycle folks that were coming through that had backpacks. They were catching pangolins, obviously a non-game species, and they harvest them for their scales and sell the scales to Asia. Obviously, the pangolin is killed as a process of that, and these pangolins are just indiscriminately caught and sold. When the anti-poaching teams were not in the field to keep these motorcycle sort of rangers out. So we received this really cool video back from this team, and it said they held up this pangolin that they took from this poacher and said, we're releasing this pangolin on behalf of Dallas Safari Club. Thank you for supporting non-game wildlife conservation. Let the pangolin go. It was super cool.
Wow, that is cool. And that's neat to see, that it's a local presence, it's a worldwide presence, and the implication of the North American outdoorsman on completely, across the globe, the implications we can have over there, whether we do or don't go hunting there. That's neat to see. And it's phenomenal that as an organization, you guys, not a lot of hunters going on over there right now, and you were still taking care of that community and that area and that continent as a whole. That's awesome. Well, Corey, I appreciate you sitting down and kind of explaining on a broader level the great things that the Dallas Safari Club is doing, the advocacy, the smaller chapters. I did not know that there would have been that many chapters and that many members here in the U.S., and that it's not just safari as the way I traditionally think of it, but just outdoor and adventure. That's awesome. So I really appreciate you coming on with me. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And we'll come at you live again from the Dallas Safari Club.